I still remember the day I left for my last deployment like it was yesterday. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden hue over our small, peaceful town. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my uniform with the precision that had been drilled into me during my years of service. The olive green fabric was more than just clothing, it was a symbol of my duty, my discipline, and the life I had chosen as an Army officer. But as I straightened my belt and glanced at my reflection, my thoughts weren't on the mission ahead. They were on Emily, my wife. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, her soft blue eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sadness. She looked so small, so fragile in that moment, as if a strong breeze could blow her away. "Are you ready, James?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, walking over to her. "It's just 6 months, Emily. I'll be back before you know it." She tried to smile, but I could see the worry etched in the lines of her face. "I'll miss you every single day," she said, and I believed her. Emily had always been my rock, the one constant in my life of chaos and unpredictability. She was the epitome of grace and kindness, a high school teacher who was adored by her students and respected by everyone in our town. But today, her usual calm demeanor was tinged with a sadness that I couldn't quite place. "I know," I said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "But you're strong. You'll manage everything here, like you always do." She held on to me, and I could feel her body trembling slightly. "Just promise me you'll stay safe." "I promise," I replied, kissing her forehead gently. I lingered for a moment, savoring the warmth of her skin against my lips. Then, with a heavy heart, I stepped back. It was time to leave. As I drove away from our home, I couldn't shake the image of Emily standing in the doorway, waving goodbye with that brave, but sad, smile. We'd done this dance many times before, but something about this departure felt different, heavier. I told myself it was just the usual pre-deployment jitters, the anxiety of leaving my wife alone for 6 months. I'd be back before long, and life would return to normal. But deep down, a small voice whispered that things might never be the same again. In the days that followed my departure, I immersed myself in my work. The Army had a way of consuming you, of making you forget everything else in your life. The drills, the missions, the camaraderie, they were all distractions, ways to keep the mind occupied and the heart from dwelling on what had been left behind. But every night, when I finally lay down to rest, my thoughts would drift back to Emily. I pictured her in our home, going about her day, teaching her students, tending to the garden, reading her favorite books. I imagined her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, her thoughts perhaps on me as she stared out the window into the quiet night. The image was comforting, but it also made my chest tighten with longing. I missed her, missed the warmth of her presence, the sound of her voice, the way she made our house feel like a home. I knew it wasn't easy for her, being alone. Emily was a strong woman, but even the strongest can feel the weight of loneliness, especially when they're used to sharing their life with someone. I told myself she would manage, just like she always had, and that I would be back soon enough to fill the void my absence had created. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the loneliness was already taking its toll on her in ways I could never have anticipated. Emily started spending more time at school, throwing herself into her work. I saw it as a good thing, a way for her to keep busy, to keep her mind off my absence. But the truth was, the school had become more than just a place of work for her. It had become an escape, a refuge from the emptiness of our home. And that was where she met Ryan. Ryan was a fellow teacher, relatively new to the school, but already well liked by the students and staff. He was the kind of man people gravitated toward, charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. I'd met him once or twice before, during school events that Emily had dragged me to. I'd thought nothing of him at the time, other than that he seemed like a decent guy. But I never imagined that he would become a part of our lives in a way I could never have foreseen. At first, their interactions were innocent enough, colleagues, sharing a few laughs, discussing school matters. But over time, something began to change. The messages between them became more frequent, more personal. Emily found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way Ryan made her laugh, the way he seemed to understand her in a way that felt new, different. It was a slow, gradual slide from friendship into something more. Emily didn't even realize it was happening until she was already in too deep. One evening, after a school event, Ryan offered to walk her to her car. The night was cool, the parking lot nearly empty, and they talked about everything and nothing as they strolled across the pavement. Emily told me later, much later, that there had been a moment of silence between them, a heavy, charged silence that neither of them dared to break. And then, before she could think, Ryan had leaned in and kissed her. It was a brief kiss, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure if she would pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself kissing him back, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't quite name. When the kiss ended, reality crashed over her like a wave, and she stepped back, horrified by what she'd done. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling with guilt and fear. But the damage had already been done. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Emily drove home that night in a daze, her mind racing, her heart heavy with guilt. She told herself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by loneliness and the stress of being alone for so long. She promised herself it would never happen again. But as the days turned into weeks, she found herself drawn back to Ryan, unable to resist the pull of what they had started. Their relationship deepened, becoming something more than just an emotional connection. They began to meet in secret, sharing moments of passion that both thrilled and tormented her. Every time she was with Ryan, she felt a pang of guilt, a reminder of the vows she had taken, the promises she had made to me. But she pushed those thoughts aside, convincing herself that she deserved this happiness, however fleeting it might be. After all, she was lonely, and I was far away, buried in my work, unaware of the storm brewing at home. But the storm was about to break. When I returned home for a short leave, I noticed the changes in Emily almost immediately. She seemed different, distracted, distant. She avoided my touch, made excuses to spend time away from home, and there was a tension between us that I couldn't quite place. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that we just needed time to readjust to each other after the months apart. But as the days went by, my suspicions grew. Emily was more secretive than usual, guarding her phone, spending hours at school, even when she didn't have to. I could feel something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that Emily, my Emily, would ever betray me. Then, one evening, while she was in the shower, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up her phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I scrolled through her messages. What I found there confirmed my worst fears. The messages between Emily and Ryan were incriminating, filled with hidden meanings and veiled references that were impossible to misinterpret. As I read them, a cold fury settled over me, mingled with a deep, aching hurt that seemed to pierce straight through to my core. I confronted Emily that night, unable to hold back the storm of emotions that had been building inside me. She tried to deny it at first, her face pale, her hands trembling. But when I showed her the messages, the truth came spilling out. Emily broke down, sobbing as she confessed everything. The kiss, the meetings, the feelings she couldn't control. She begged for forgiveness, her voice choked with regret and shame. But all I could feel was a deep, overwhelming sense of betrayal. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had done the one thing I had never imagined possible. I couldn't stay in the house that night. I packed a bag and left, returning to the military base, needing to put as much distance between myself and the pain as possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape it. The memories haunted me, the image of Emily and Ryan together playing over and over in my mind, a constant reminder of the trust that had been shattered. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out the pain with the discipline and focus that the army demanded. But it wasn't enough. The hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal, it all followed me, clinging to me like a shadow that I couldn't shake. I thought about Emily constantly, wondering what had gone wrong. Was it my fault for leaving her alone so often? For prioritizing my duty over our relationship? I had always thought that Emily understood, that she supported me as much as I had supported her. But now, I wasn't so sure. The doubts gnawed at me, each question tearing at the fragile pieces of my heart. Weeks turned into months, and though I was back on base, I couldn't focus. My performance began to suffer. My commanding officer noticed, pulling me aside one day after a particularly rough drill. "James, whatever's going on, you need to get it together. We need you at your best." I wanted to tell him everything, how my world had crumbled, how my wife had betrayed me while I was out there serving my country. But I couldn't. The shame felt too heavy to bear. I nodded instead, promising to fix myself. But I didn't know how. As much as I tried to distance myself from Emily, I couldn't stop the part of me that still loved her. Every night, I lay awake, wondering if things could ever be the same. Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild? I didn't know if I could trust her again, but the memories of our life together, the moments we had shared, tugged at my heart like a rope pulling me in two directions. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I received a call from her. I hadn't expected it after I left. We had barely spoken. My hands trembled as I stared at the phone, debating whether to pick up. Finally, I answered, my voice low and heavy with unresolved anger. "James." Her voice sounded small, broken. "Please, can we talk?" "I don't know if there's anything left to say, Emily," I replied, cold and detached, masking the storm inside me. "There is. There's so much I need to say. Please, just hear me out," she pleaded, her words cracking as though she was fighting back tears. Despite everything, I could hear the pain in her voice, and for a moment, I hesitated. This wasn't just about her affair with Ryan. It was about everything we had built together, and how it had crumbled before our eyes. "Fine," I said after a long pause. "Talk." Emily took a shaky breath before she began. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I broke the trust we had, and I hurt you in a way I never thought I could. But James, I was lost. You were gone for so long, and I was drowning in loneliness. I know that's no excuse, but it's the truth. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. And Ryan, he was there. He listened. He made me feel seen, understood, but it was wrong. I know that now. I've ended it, James. I swear it's over. I don't want him. I want you. I always have." Her words cut deep, but they didn't heal the wounds she had caused. "You want me now, after everything?" I asked, my voice rising with anger. "You should have thought about that before you let him into our lives, Emily. Before you kissed him. Before you let it get this far." She was crying now, her sobs barely audible through the phone. I know. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But please, I'm begging you, James. Give us another chance. Let me try to fix what I broke." I could feel my heart hardening, building walls around the hurt to protect myself from further pain. "Emily, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." There was silence on the other end of the line, the weight of my words sinking in. After what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "Please, just think about it. I love you, James." I hung up without responding, my chest heaving with emotion. Her words lingered in the air, but I wasn't ready to let them take root. I wasn't ready to make any decisions, not yet. Days passed, and I found myself at a crossroads. I had a choice to make: either continue living with the anger or take a step toward healing, whether that meant rebuilding with Emily or walking away for good. Then, one afternoon, as I was cleaning out my locker, I found an old photograph tucked inside my duffel bag. It was of Emily and me, taken on the day I received my promotion to captain. We were smiling, her arm wrapped tightly around my waist, her eyes glowing with pride. I stared at the picture for what felt like hours, remembering the love we had shared, the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. The memories hit me like a tidal wave, the good and the bad. Our first date, the night I proposed, the mornings we spent in each other's arms, the laughter, the fights, the forgiveness. I realized then that love was never simple. It was messy, painful, and at times unbearably hard. But it was also beautiful, and at one point in my life, Emily had been my entire world. I didn't know if we could find our way back to that place, but I owed it to myself, and maybe even to her, to try. The next morning, I found myself driving back to our home. The house looked the same from the outside, but everything inside me had changed. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, before walking up to the door and knocking. It felt strange, knocking on my own door, as though I was a stranger to the life I had once known. Emily opened the door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, as though she wasn't sure whether I had come to say goodbye or to start again. "I've been thinking," I said quietly, "about everything." Her breath hitched as she waited for me to continue. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I admitted, the weight of the words hanging heavy between us. "But I want to try. For us. For what we had. But Emily, if we do this, you have to be honest with me. Completely. No more secrets, no more lies." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear, James. No more lies." I stepped inside, and as the door closed behind me, I realized that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild, to find the love that had once been lost. But as we sat down to talk, to try and pick up the pieces, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that the cracks in our foundation were too deep, that no matter how hard we tried, we might never be able to mend what had been broken. Only time would tell if love was strong enough to survive the silent betrayal . The conversation that followed was one of the hardest I had ever endured. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a chasm between us that felt impossible to bridge. Emily's voice was shaky as she recounted everything, every secret meeting, every lie she had told, every moment she had spent with Ryan. It was excruciating to listen to, each word like a dagger piercing my heart. But I needed to hear it all. I needed to understand the depth of her betrayal if I was ever going to find a way to move forward. Emily didn't hold back, and I could see the torment in her eyes as she confessed. She talked about how it started innocently enough, with small conversations that grew into something more. She spoke of her loneliness, how she felt like she was losing herself while I was away, how Ryan had been there when she needed someone. Her words were laced with regret, but also with a painful honesty that made it clear she was no longer hiding anything. As she spoke, I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was a step we needed to take if there was ever going to be a chance for us to heal. When she finished, there was a long silence. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something, anything, but I was still processing everything she had said. "I don't know how we got here, Emily," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. "We were so strong once. We loved each other so much. How did it all fall apart?" She looked down at her hands, which were trembling in her lap. "I don't know, James. I wish I could go back and change everything. I wish I could take away all the pain I've caused you. But I can't. All I can do is try to make things right from here on out." I sighed deeply, running a hand through my hair. "Do you still love me, Emily? Or has too much happened for us to ever get that back?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me. "I never stopped loving you, James. Even when I was with him, it was you I thought about. I know it doesn't make any sense, And I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. I was lost, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But I love you. I've always loved you. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love could conquer the hurt, the betrayal, the shattered trust. But it wasn't that simple. Love alone wasn't enough to fix the damage that had been done. I love you too, Emily, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. But I don't know if that's enough anymore. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. She nodded, her tears flowing freely now. I know, but I want to try, James. I want to fight for us, for our marriage, for everything we've built together. Please, just give me a chance to prove to you that we can get through this. I sat there, staring at the woman I had once considered my soulmate, the woman who had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave this all behind and start fresh. But another part of me, the part that still loved her deeply, wanted to try to see if there was anything left to salvage. I'll give you that chance, I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. But it's not going to be easy, Emily. It's going to take a lot of time, and a lot of work. And even then, I don't know if we'll make it. She reached out, taking my hand in hers, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't pull away. I understand, James. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want us to have a chance. We sat in silence for a while, our hands still clasped together. There was so much uncertainty, so much pain still to work through. But in that moment, there was also a glimmer of hope, a small, fragile thread that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As I left the house that night, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. We were far from healed, far from whole, but we had taken the first step toward something new. It wasn't a promise of a happy ending, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. We talked more openly than we had in years, sharing our fears, our hopes, our doubts. There were days when the anger and hurt felt overwhelming, when I questioned whether we were making the right choice. But there were also moments of connection, small glimpses of the love that had once been the foundation of our marriage. We started seeing a marriage counselor, someone who could help us navigate the complicated emotions and guide us through the healing process. It wasn't easy. There were times when the sessions felt more like tearing open old wounds than healing them. But gradually, we began to understand each other in ways we hadn't before. We started to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, piece by fragile piece. One night, several months into our counseling, Emily and I found ourselves sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. It was one of those quiet moments that we used to share before everything fell apart. And for the first time in a long time, it felt natural, comfortable. "Do you think we'll ever be the same again?" she asked, her voice soft, as if she was afraid of the answer. I thought about it for a moment before replying. "No, I don't think we'll ever be the same. Too much has happened. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we can be something new, something stronger." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I'd like that. I'd like to be stronger together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized that we had a long road ahead of us. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the pain would resurface. But we had survived the storm, and we were still standing. We were choosing to fight for our marriage, to fight for each other. And in that choice, there was a silent promise, a promise to keep moving forward, to keep trying, to keep loving, even when it was hard. The silent betrayal had changed us, but it hadn't destroyed us. We were different now, but perhaps, in time, we could be stronger for it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and I settled into a new rhythm, one that was marked by a fragile peace. We were learning how to navigate this new version of our relationship, where honesty was no longer optional, but essential. The wounds were still fresh, but they were beginning to heal, slowly, leaving behind scars that would remind us of what we had endured. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Emily looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in a long time. "James," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. Even after all the progress we had made, the fear of another revelation, another betrayal, still lingered in the back of my mind. But I steeled myself, nodding for her to continue. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've come to realize that part of what led me down that path with Ryan was that I felt disconnected from you. Not just because of the distance, but because I didn't know how to reach you anymore." I frowned, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking down at her hands. "I don't know how to explain it. You've always been so strong, so focused on your duty, on being the best soldier you could be. And I admired that I still do. But somewhere along the way, I felt like I lost you, like the army became more important than us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always believed that I was doing what was best for us, for our future. But in my dedication to my duty, had I neglected the very person I was supposed to be protecting? "I never wanted you to feel that way," I said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "I thought I was doing what was right, for both of us. But maybe I didn't see how much it was affecting you." She squeezed my hand, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't blame you, James. I know how important your work is. But I think we both need to find a way to balance it better. I don't want to lose you again, not like that." Her words were a wake-up call, a reminder that our marriage wasn't just about surviving the hard times, but about thriving together, about being present for each other in ways that truly mattered. "I promise you, Emily," I said, my voice filled with conviction. "I'll do better. We'll do better. We'll find that balance." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and hope. "We've come so far, James. I believe we can make it through this. But we have to keep talking, keep being honest with each other." And so, we continued to rebuild, not just as a couple, but as individuals who were learning to grow together. We made a conscious effort to spend more time together, to reconnect in ways that we hadn't done in years. We started going on walks after dinner, talking about our days, our dreams, our fears. It was as if we were rediscovering each other, finding new layers to our relationship that we hadn't explored before. But just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, life threw us another curveball, one that would test the strength of our newfound connection. It was a crisp autumn morning when Emily received the news. We were having breakfast, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the table. Emily's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her expression shifting from relaxed to tense in an instant. "What is it?" I asked, sensing the change in her demeanor. "It's from the school," she replied, her voice tight. "Ryan's been in an accident." My stomach dropped. Despite everything that had happened, the mention of Ryan's name still stirred up a whirlwind of emotions. But before I could process my feelings, Emily was already out of her seat, grabbing her coat. "I have to go," she said, her voice urgent. "I need to see if he's okay." I stood there, frozen, as I watched her rush to the door. A part of me wanted to stop her, to demand that she stay with me, that she choose me over him. But another part of me, the part that had come to understand the complexity of human emotions, knew that this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about compassion, about doing what was right. "Emily," I called after her, my voice strained, "I'll come with you." She paused, her eyes searching mine for a moment before she nodded. "Thank you, James." We drove to the hospital in silence, the tension in the car palpable. I could feel the conflict raging inside me, jealousy, anger, and a deep-seated fear that this might reignite something between them. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the road ahead. When we arrived at the hospital, Emily immediately went to the front desk to ask about Ryan's condition. I hung back, giving her space, but my eyes never left her. I could see the worry etched on her face, the concern that went beyond mere friendship. And it hurt God. It hurt. But I knew that this was part of the process, part of the healing. A nurse directed us to the waiting room, where we found Ryan's parents and a few other colleagues from the school. Emily went to them, offering her support, while I stood on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider in a situation that was far too personal for my liking. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor finally emerged, giving us an update on Ryan's condition. He had been in a car accident, and while his injuries were serious, they weren't life-threatening. The relief on Emily's face was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy. But I reminded myself that this wasn't about me. It was about Emily, about supporting her through this, just as she had supported me through my darkest moments. As the hours passed, we remained at the hospital, waiting for any news on Ryan's progress. Emily stayed close to his parents, offering comfort and reassurance, while I kept my distance, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in this unfolding drama. But as the night wore on, something shifted. Emily began to drift back toward me, her eyes searching mine for reassurance, for the connection that we had been rebuilding. And in that moment, I realized that despite everything, despite the history between us, she was choosing me, choosing us. When Ryan was finally stable enough to receive visitors, Emily turned to me, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "I'm going to see him," she said softly, "but I want you to come with me." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as we made our way to Ryan's room. It was a small, sterile space, filled with the hum of machines and the soft beeping of monitors. Ryan was lying in the bed, his face pale, bandages covering his head and arms. He looked fragile, vulnerable, a far cry from the confident man I had once envied. Emily approached the bed, her hand reaching out to touch Ryan's arm gently. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you're okay." He stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open, and when he saw her, a small, weak smile crossed his face. "Emily," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You came." "I'm here," she said, her voice steady. "And so is James." Ryan's eyes flicked to me, and for a moment, there was a tense silence. But then, to my surprise, he nodded, a look of understanding passing between us. There were no words needed, just a silent acknowledgement that whatever had happened between us, between him and Emily, was in the past. As we left the hospital that night, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. We were far from perfect, far from fully healed, but we were moving forward together. In the days that followed, Emily and I continued to rebuild our lives, one step at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but there was a sense of hope, a belief that we could make it through anything as long as we were honest with each other, as long as we kept choosing each other every day. And in the end, that's what mattered most, the choice to keep fighting, to keep loving, even when it was hard. The silent betrayal had changed us, but it hadn't destroyed us. We were different now, stronger, and more connected than we had ever been before. And as we faced the future together, hand in hand, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them as a team, unbreakable, unyielding, and united by a love that had survived the darkest of times. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been painful, filled with heartache and doubt, but it had also been a journey of growth, of rediscovery. We had found our way back to each other, not as the same people we were before, but as two individuals who had been tested and had emerged stronger, more resilient. And as I held Emily close that night, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine, I knew that we had something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. We had been through the fire, and we had come out on the other side, scarred but not broken, forever changed, but still together. In that moment, I realized that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never making mistakes.